getting some out of the latest episodes of Intelligent Nexus, describing how the energy conscious manifests inside us a specific vibrational frequency by how is established. So a lot of us think, a lot of the same things, but how we think this creates really diverse and sometimes the antithesis of what someone else thinks how they think. The same thing that someone else thinks how they think. So just realizing that there's aspect to that innate quality that we each possess, how we think what we think, is essential in recognizing the vibrational frequency that's manifested and subsequently attract. So, previously we talked about, the neural anatomy and, how to kind of feed that neural needs to grow and develop, how the synapse between neurons is kind of like a spark plug, and how you can kind of clean that by using certain neural peptides, and then how neural pathways are established inside the limbic mind. I specifically say the limbic mind because they're developed all over the brain, but the limbic mind has kind of the epicenter of where our foundational emotions and the urgency or passivity that we think it comes from. And and so the big part of our conscious thought, that neocortex is extremely important. We see why that does. I mean, it's huge, right? But we don't recognize the underlying aspects that basically drive the neocortex come from the limbic mind. So, and we all have, a lot of certain things create passion in us, they kind of motivate us, they give us, sometimes they give us anger, sometimes they give us joy, sometimes they give us, all these different forms of pleasure and things, So, coming to terms with that subconscious part of ourselves is very critical in being able to utilize the neocortex of the cognitive behavior more aptly and with skill, with talent. We see these people speak with such a great way of orating these thoughts and emotions in ways that just have a depth to them. And some people are very superficial, somewhat immature, somewhat I use the word unintellectual, but they just touch on the surface. There's no depth in how they think, And I'm not pointing a finger saying, I'm like that in certain ways, man. If I push certain buttons, I become very immature. I don't act very mature. I think I say maturity as a way of delving into the depth of how we think. And I tried, Intelligent Nexus has tried to create a linear process of appreciating all this information, because it's huge trying to take this all in and stuff, and the book Sublime Realms of Reality is kind of a way to kind of go to the beat. It has a bunch of different paragraphs, and I'm not sure exactly how many there is. I think it's like 19 or 20 something paragraphs that kind of divide this all up into different realms. So it helps you to have this kind of foundation in order to basically conceptualize how consciousness is manifested in certain paradigms. Certainly not all paradigms, but very relative paradigms to recognize how we think is we use the term consciousness. So early on, Intelligent Nexus just tried to take history and took basically a big part of American U.S. Christianity. There's a lot of other religions too, but like a lot of the things, it took that and it delved into different aspects of what Jesus was, Mary, what the psychology that was going on behind the scenes with Pontius Pilate, with the rulers that controlled him, with the I'm trying to think of the term, but religious pontiffs that, were trying to manipulate and control and were less interested. That same stuff that's happening now is that was happening then. Tapped into a little bit of the misogynistic nature of men and how they act with women, and how there's a reverse consequence to that. Women react to men, so that happens now in its own way. But back in the Salem witch hunts, it was just cruel how that happened in ways that just allowed for such cruelty to exist. In the sense of being right. I know what God is, and you don't. All this, you just think of how sick that is. But that same thing is happening now. And then we took a look at slavery. We took a look at how this, one very noble black young man who just was just the emblem of what you would want humanity to embody, and how he was trying to help this injured farmer save his farm, and how people got jealous, and these guys who were white men who were a lot less than this young black man. And it could be any color. It could be vice versa. It could be, some white guy, picked up by a black guy, the same thing. So it's not saying one race is better than the other or less than. I'm just saying this dynamic happens and how it happened. Slavery is such a universal concept. You try to break that down and look at that in different avenues and say, hey man, how is that happening today, And then, it kind of, Intelligent Nexus took that and kind of created this paradigm of these different actors who all having these very critical issues in their lives that kind of create a very scarred limbic mind that they have very difficulty using their conscious cortex, because the limbic mind is so injured, and how you see these guys acting out, and I created certain famous actors to try to emblem that so people can kind of connect to it or whatever. So and then Intelligent Nexus now, in a living fashion, is looking at how the consciousness is actually manifested, and how someone who's willing to work at it and try to realize, how do I make this mind work better for me, and that's a huge undertaking, you know what I'm saying? But like Einstein, man, if we set goals we know we can achieve, we haven't set them high enough. And what better thing to fail at than something utopian that's trying to make your mind the most useful instrument you can use in words to reality, to manifest reality, and it gets difficult, at times, especially when we're faced with failure and problems that we think so personally of, that this is my problem, this is the thing. And in a sense it is, but in a sense it also gives us a lock to figure out a key to put into it. And so what we're coming into right now, or what Intelligent Nexus is addressing, is how to create that key. How to create that key by how we think to unlock that problem, that door, that fear, how to walk into that, and so it's taking on different aspects of what those problems are, and how those problems can actually enable us to control the vibrational frequency and how we think. And again, it's pretty complicated, but the problems we experience usually default to inadequate ways our limbic mind thinks in, that creates disharmony, and we're getting into the level now where we're looking at inside our brain a trifecta. You can think of the Father, Son, Holy Ghost, or the cross, or things like this. But how the neocortex, conscious mind, the limbic mind, subconscious mind, and the base of the brain, which is basically a God frequency that has a vibration. I use God in a metaphorical way, specifying that universal energy that manifests everything, the unmanifest that the manifest comes from. So tapping into these very parallel vibrational frequency that the base of the brain has to relate to the outside world and to help to create the body. Now homeostasis to the outside energy that's outside, it adapts to that in a very functional way. But in a spiritual realm, it gives us the ability to tap into that energy. And what the coming chapter episodes of telekinesis is looking at is specifically failure. It's amazing what we can learn, what we can gain from embracing failure, from looking at this and saying, you know what, this failure is not a destination. It's not something like it's a stop sign or it's the end of the road. It's actually an ability to open another doorway that is unrealized yet. And the attitude that we have in embracing failure is sort of like a ladder. There's parts of failure that in order to experience it, we have to feel like we're less than. We have to feel like, I don't deserve to be what I'm striving for. There's an imposter syndrome. There's this idea that, I'm not worth that, I'm not have this. And so then we have to deal with that. And then we have to develop an attitude, a mindset, I'm willing to learn. I'm willing to get better. I'm willing to try. And try is not just sit on my butt and have a pina colada and get some sun, and I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with that, but I'm saying to try means that we're willing to put effort and want to discipline ourselves. And we spoke earlier about a lot of ways to discipline ourselves. And discipline ourselves is, to me, discipline was a bad word. It didn't feel good when I thought of discipline. I'm like, man, I don't want to do that. But now I realize it's like discipline ourselves to act and behave in specific ways. I can give my brain the ability to produce, we talked about neuropeptides and fertilizer. I think of that has created an anabolic potential for neural anatomy to develop. The same way you develop anabolic potential for muscles to develop, So there's many crossovers, talk about non-binary being the brain's ability to do these incredible things at one time. The amount of things the brain can do is pretty much infinite at one time that we're not even aware of. But when we try to address and repair, this is where the great part of turning failure into opportunity. When we look at failure and go, what can I start doing to address this perception of failure? As we start to repair that, the brain, it's not a static idea of repairing this. No, when we start to repair one part of the brain, there's a crossover to I want to say infinite, but there's so many ways that the brain starts working. So if we discipline ourselves to spend some time in the morning or the evenings, just trying to take in this quiet, this ability to appreciate everything else, so space like no minds and all that's huge. But when we try to embrace that, it's not easy to do that at first. If it was, everybody would do it. But it takes discipline. You have to be able to kind of be with this uneasiness, this mind wanting to dance. As we start to embrace that, we start to realize we start to get control over other things in our lives that we didn't have control of. Sometimes we're able to, shut up and not say something when we really want to, but it's not in our best benefit to do that, And it goes on in so many ways. Anyway, I just hope that you maybe get something out of these last few episodes, and the next episode of Tennessee is bringing to you. And again, man, I'm trying to use some art so it creates some kind of poetry, some kind of image that kind of correlates to what we're talking about, and then find some really inspiring music that identifies it, And I talk about the word non-binary, the brain, but it's also reality. So a lot of the figures that I use to create, current day politics and things like that, nobody's necessarily all bad, and nobody's necessarily all good. You know what I'm saying? So, and of course, of the imagery and stuff, I depict certain people as having, maybe ghoulish or demonic tendencies, but there's a lot of good in those people too. You know what I'm saying? So, a lot of things that reward us best is when we get out of this black and white, this good and bad scenario, and we say, what are some of the good things about these people? What are some of the, and then when we start to look at some of the good things about other people that, it's easy to see them as bad, we start to look at ourselves and go, I'm not all that good. I got some things on me, and when we start to do that, then we start to have this relationship, of as within to without, and this kind of dynamic sense of, dynamic means there's many aspects to me that are changing and evolving, and it's not this finite, thing of this is what I am. No, I have the ability to grow and mature and develop. Anyway, I know there's a lot take in. But I hope some of that comes across in the episodes. I hope you enjoy, kind of get some fun out of it. And thanks for tuning into Intelligent Nexus.